What is up, guys? Today I'm going to be giving you the most in-depth ultimate race tier list in Baldur's Gate 3. Now this is going to be broken into two parts. The first part is me describing each race and telling you exactly what classes would go along well with that race. The second part is a conventional tier list format. So if you clicked on this video expecting a tier list, you are going to get it. You can look in the timestamps below and the chapters that will break down exactly what you're looking for, so you can go to each race and you can go to the tier list section of the video if you're not interested in the race descriptions and what classes it will pair well with. Before I actually get into all the descriptions and the tier list, I want to give some of my qualifications. I've beaten the game in honor mode. I have over 260 hours in game now, with over 120 in the hardest difficulty honor mode. So I do know the game pretty well. I've been content creating since the very first day this game came out, and also played back in beta, starting out with the elf. So what does the elf bring to the table? So it has base racial movement speed, so nothing special there. It has elven weapon training. So one nice thing about the elf, very similar to the human, is you have more proficiencies with weapons. It's really nice if your class doesn't give you a lot of proficiencies to have base racial proficiencies with the actual different weapons, so you can use weapons earlier, basically. This is really good for Act 1. Dark Vision. Dark Vision is something that is just really a good thing to have, guys. Now, this is base Dark Vision up to 12 meters. There's also an enhanced version of Dark Vision, and you have Fey Ancestry. So Dark Vision, really, the main place you're going to be using this is in the Underdark. So this is really nice in the early part of the game. In later acts, it's a little bit less useful, but it's still a very nice thing to have. Fey Ancestry, I would say this about it. Fey Ancestry is mainly good for the ability where people can't put you to sleep. The advantage on saving throws against being charmed, you're not going to be charmed that many times, honestly, in the game. So it's not really that great. But magic not being able to put you to sleep is very, very useful. So elves overall, we'll look at where they are in the tier list format, but in terms of what classes they pair well with, it will be 100% most magic classes. Now, when I say magic classes, I mean wizards, sorcerers, even perhaps warlocks, although you can look at my class tier list and see why I don't think warlocks are that great of a class in general. Now, what does High Elf versus Wood Elf give you? High Elf is pretty useless. You only get a Fire Bolt cantrip. This is something you're going to be getting even, like, let's say if you are a wizard. Not really something that's super useful. So mainly because you're going to be using elves for martial based classes. Since you're going to be using elves mainly for magic based classes, it's not going to be really too helpful to have just an additional cantrip. Wood elves do get Fleet of Foot. Now, wood elves are much better. You should really never pick a high elf. You should always pick a wood elf, because just getting this long strider-esque movement speed buff where you can actually increase your movement speed by 1.5 meters is way, way better than getting the firebolt. So I would highly recommend that you always choose wood elf if you're going to be using elf. So now let's go on into the Tieflings. Let's look at Tieflings. So Tieflings are a really cool race. I think visually, the visual design is really awesome. Base racial movement speed, nothing too crazy there. Dark Vision, so very similar to Elf. They can see in the Underdark. It is quite useful. Hellish Resistance. You have resistance, so you're taking 50% damage to fire damage. Now, the issue being that there's not many times, maybe the Forge, there's not many times that you're taking huge amounts of fire damage in the game. It's not something that's useless, because, I mean, exploding barrels, you do have dragons in the game. There is sometimes that Hellish Resistance is going to be good, but honestly, it's not super, super great. That is another thing that's kind of bad about them, is they're not getting any sort of base racial abilities to actually for weapons. So that is something that Tieflings kind of do not bring to the table. Yeah, it's okay. Tieflings are fine, but I would say that they're not that great in my opinion. Now, in terms of the different types of Tieflings, we're going to be looking. You have the Asmodeus Tiefling. So you just get a cantrip to produce flame. Useless. Definitely do not pick this Tiefling subtype. You get the Mesophilius Tiefling. This actually gives you Mage Hand. Mage Hand is definitely more useful. Compared to Produce Flame, Mage Hand is way more useful in the game. So definitely the way to go there. And then you have the Zerial Tiefling, which gets you Thaumaturgy. Now, between these three subclasses, I'm going to tell you 100% the Thaumaturgy is the best spell here, the best cantrip. It is actually really insanely good for cantrip. You get advantage on intimidation and performance checks. So when you're picking a Tiefling, Zerial Tiefling is absolutely what you should be picking 100% of the time. Again, if you skip to the segment about the tier list, we're going to see what Tieflings are just in general. But in terms of the Tiefling breakdown, it's definitely the Zerial Tiefling. Let's go on to the Drow. So now we have the Drow. The Drow, I would say, is one of the best races in the game, bar none. You have base racial movement speed. You have Drow weapon training. So very similar to the Elves. Proficiency with different martial-based weapons. In this case, the rapier, the short sword, and the hand crossbow. Hand crossbows being something very useful in the early game. One thing I will say about the Drow specifically, where the Tieflings are mainly a martial-based class, like for instance, like Berserkers, Fighters, the Drow is very adaptable. Because of this weapon training, it is more of a finesse-based class, so I would say like Rangers, specifically Rogues, pretty much all mage classes, so like Wizards, you know, Sorcerers, Warlocks. Drow is one of the best classes in the game, without any question about it. You also get superior dark vision, can see in the dark up to 24 meters. So this is the better version of the conventional dark vision, and it is incredibly good. And you get Fey ancestry. So if you look at this, you basically on the Seldarin Drow versus the Loftswarm Drow, the only really difference between these two subraces is dialogue. Seldarin Drows will get a little bit different dialogue. In my opinion, Loftswarm is the way to go on Drow. But if you just look at this, I mean, the cantrip's not really important. Dancing Lights is not something that's going to help you too often. But in terms of the base racial features, this is kind of just a elf plus. There's really not many disadvantages, and there's a lot of advantages to picking Drow. It also makes Act 1 a lot easier, because generally Drow just trivializes Act 1. A lot of people just kind of let you in the door if you are Drow. So I'm going to be showing you on the race tier list where I think this is, but I'll just give you a little spoiler that Drow is very good. Now we go on to Human. What does Human bring to the table? Base racial movement speed, civil militia. So the nice thing about Humans is that if you're playing any sort of martial-based class, you basically have proficiency with a lot of stuff. You also have armor proficiency with light, which isn't really too important because a lot of things give you light armor proficiency, but shields, that is quite important because not all classes do give you shield proficiency. So this is really good if you're playing anything like, you know, fighter, barbarian, any martial-based classes where humans shine. You do get human versatility, so you can get an additional skill to be proficient in, and your carrying capacity is increased by 1/4. I will warn you right now, guys, you should not be using pack mules in the game. You should not be packing amounts of stuff onto people. You should be keeping it at camp and then just transferring it when it's being sold. The reason being is that characters can glitch out and you can lose these items. So just don't use this human versatility. Don't use the pack mule aspect to just carry a lot on a character. I've had whole characters lost and thousands, probably tens of thousands of gold lost. So would not recommend you to use that. Use your camp box 100%. Now we are going to go on to the Githyanki. If there is a martial-based class, it is going to be the Githyanki. They are probably #1 for martial-based classes. So what do you get from the Githyanki? Well, you get ancestral knowledge, gain proficiency in all skills of a chosen ability. This is really good. Ancestral knowledge is actually a really good racial characteristic. You get a Mage Hand, basically a Githyanki version of Mage Hand, pretty useful. Base movement speed, and martial prodigy. So a lifetime of relentless training gave you armor proficiency with light and medium, as well as proficiency with the short sword, the long sword, and the great sword. So if you're going to be playing a barbarian, if you're going to be playing a fighter, pretty much most martial classes, you probably should be playing a Githyanki. I know a lot of people don't like them visually. I think they're quite beautiful. I really do like Githyanki in general. I'm a big Githyanki fan. But I will tell you right now that Githyanki are really good and probably the second best martial race other than the half-orc, which we'll be talking about. The half-orc is kind of in a category of its own. But yeah, Githyanki, incredibly, incredibly good. And a lot of the weapons that you get in the game, which I don't want to, that's kind of a topic for a separate video, but a lot of the weapons that you get in the game are really favoring Githyanki. Githyanki get a lot of specialized weapons that are extremely good for martial classes. We are now moving on to dwarves. I think dwarves are really cool looking race. I think just the base dwarves, especially the female dwarves, look really good, and the facial animations are really nice. What do you get in terms of racial? You can get 7.5 meters a ton, so this should be basically, you know, like everybody else, other than it is a little bit less. So it's actually instead of 9 meters, it's 7.5. So it's a little bit lower. I was like, I think that's a little bit lower, but still same base. So like the short races, you're kind of getting a little bit less movement. Movement speed is important, guys. As much as I hate to be one of those people that hop on long strider and stuff like that, movement speed is important in the game. It's just an unfortunate fact. And yeah, I'm not a big fan of long strider, but movement speed is important, and cutting out 1.5 meters a second is kind of negative. Dwarven combat training, this time you get battle axe, hand axe, light hammer, and warhammer proficiency. Regular dark vision, 12 meter dark vision, and dwarven resistances. Now, dwarven resistance is kind of nice. Advantage on saving throws against poison. There's a lot of enemies in the game that will try to poison you. You have resistance to poison damage, so you will take 50% less poison. In terms of the sub-races here, you got the Gold Dwarf, the Dwagar, and the Shield Dwarf. Gold Dwarf giving you hit point maximum increases by 1 and increases by 1 every time you gain a level. That's going to be up to 12 in the whole game. It's okay. Maybe for a Barbarian, this would be good. There's not as much tanking in the game as you would think, so it's not as good as it sounds. Shield Dwarf, you have armor proficiency with light and medium armor. Not really too useful, would not use it. Dwagar, best dwarf by far. Superior dark vision, can see up to 25 meters in the Underdark. And Dwagar resistances, you have advantage on and saving throws against illusions and against being charmed or paralyzed. Now, a lot of enemies in the game will also paralyze you, so the Dwagar resilience is absolutely the best type of dwarf. So I would pretty much almost always pick the Dwagar if you are playing a dwarf. Dwarf is a martially oriented race, to be honest with you. Although it can play spellcasters, it's definitely martially oriented, very much like the Githyanki, and as we'll be showing later, like the half-orc. Now let's go to a mostly mage-based class, which is the half-elf. Half-elf, pretty useful, 9 meters a turn, civil militia, so this is basically a human skill. So half-elf, you're basically getting some of the stuff from human and some of the stuff from elf. So you get the civil militia just like human, dark vision just like elf, and Fey ancestry just like elf. When we actually go to the sub-races, you get the high elf, the firebolt. We've already talked about this, why this is bad. Don't choose the half-elf whatsoever. Wood half-elf, and you get the fleet of foot, so you absolutely, this is better than the high half-elf. And then the drow half-elf, but you only really get the dancing lights cantrip, so that's basically useless. Now, what I will say is I really like the look of the drow half-elf subclass. They look fantastic, really unique, but on paper, I can only recommend the wood half-elf because the fleet of foot increasing 1.5 meters a second, meters per turn, just too good. Half-elves are predominantly a mage-oriented sub-race, and so yeah, I would use them for warlocks, sorcerers, wizards, etc., etc. They're really good, and half-elf, you could say, is got the best parts of elf and the best parts of human, but maybe a little bit behind the drow. That's where I kind of put them. Halfling, very, very interesting race. Now, halfling is one of those ones that a lot of people do not play. The look is really up to personal preference. I can see a lot of people being turned off by the halfling. Some people like it. It's something that you either like or you don't like. I believe the males definitely look a lot worse than the females. Lucky is the racial trait. When you roll a 1 for an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, that's a lot, guys. You can re-roll the dice and must use the new roll. That saves you against critical failures. So lucky is one of the best racial features in the game. No doubt about that. Base racial movement speed, just like the dwarf, they can only move 7.5 meters a second. That's quite bad. And they have Brave, so you have advantage against being frightened. So if you just look at them on paper, the Halfling's got a lot going for it. Now, the Halfling is probably the biggest, like, rogue or ranger subclass in the game, I would say, where, you know, this race and the sub-races really are good at being rogues and rangers. You can see the Lightfoot, you have natural advantage on stealth checks. So if you're playing a rogue, Lightfoot Halfling, probably the way to go, 100%. Strongheart Halfling, you have advantage against poison and resistance to poison damage. So this basically makes it into kind of like a mix between a halfling and a dwarf. So that's basically what that is. So, you know, if you like some things about the dwarf, but you also like the lucky ability, then the Strongheart Halfling is actually quite good. I think people kind of sleep on this subrace, and yeah, Strongheart Halfling, not bad, and actually kind of got some OP things about it, to be completely honest with you. The gnome. You know, 7.5 movement speed, so just like the dwarf, just like the halfling, will not move them very far each turn. Gnome cutting, you have advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. So this is definitely good if you're playing any type of kind of charisma character or intelligence or wizard. So you can kind of see where you're going with this. Cleric classes, this is really good on. Wizards, this is really good on. And or sorcerers, or strangely enough, paladins. So the gnomes actually have kind of a large range of classes that they can play. They are kind of a catch-all race, to be honest. The rock gnome gets regular dark vision and artificer's lore. Add twice your proficiency bonus to history checks. Pretty useless because you don't use history checks that much in the game. So I wouldn't really put rock gnome as being too good. Forest gnome, you can speak with animals. This is a lot better because speak with animals, even though you get a bunch of potions, you can get the spell quite easily. It is actually a useful spell. So that is something good. And you can see it's, you know, regular dark vision, basically. And then you have the deep gnome, which is, I believe, by far the best version of the gnomes. You get superior dark vision, so 24 meters. Again, this will help you in the Underdark, very similar to the Drow in this way. And stone camouflage, you get advantage on stealth checks. So the gnome has a lot of versatility. You could be playing this as a rogue, you could be playing this as a ranger, you could be playing this as a paladin. It kind of can go anywhere. The only big disadvantage of the gnome is that small movement speed. I think that kind of makes it mandatory that you have at least one character in your party casting Longstrider, because you're going to really feel the difference if you do not. So that's a little bit of a negative to talk about, but we'll see in the tier list where they fit into things. Now let's move on to the Dragonborn, guys, the Dragonborn. Dragonborn are probably one of the most interesting races, and not played enough, in my opinion. I really do like them. The issue is the race feature is basically non-existent. The race feature is their sub-race feature. And what it is that each particular subtype of Dragonborn can have a breath attack, more or less. Yeah, so like, for instance, the black dragon born gets acid breath, so it does an acid breath attack, and it has resistance to acid. Blue has a lightning breath and resistance to lightning. Brass has fire and resistance to fire. You start to get this each one's. Now, the weird thing is there's some that are basically duplicates. So, for instance, bronze and blue, if you look, are actually the same. So it's kind of bizarre. So I don't really get why they do that. Copper and black are the same. So it is kind of weird. I believe it's, what is it? Brass and gold are the same. So some of it is visual differences. Some of it is actually different in terms of what you get. to be honest with you guys, none of these are too good. They look really cool. I like them, but are these breath attacks good? No, they are not. And is the resistances to these damages good? Not really. Not enough to pick a race, and does a lot of better races. We'll see where Dragonborn fit into the tier list. I do think they are one of the coolest looking races by far. I really, really do like the visual design. But just in terms of strength, I can't put it high up there. And finally, before we go to the tier list part of the video, we are going to be looking at the half-orcs. Now, half-orcs, what they don't make up in beauty, they make up for definitely in terms of stats, guys. They can move 9 meters a second. They have dark vision. They have relentless endurance. When you hit 0 HP, you regain 1 HP instead of becoming down. This is one of the best racial features in the game because there's a lot of times that an enemy will just try to burst you down. And if they down you, another teammate's going to have to revive you, and then you're going to miss your action for that turn and just have a bonus action. So just this, you basically regaining 1 HP instead of being downed, is an incredibly, incredibly useful racial feature. And then you get Savage Attack. When you land a critical hit with a melee weapon attack, you deal an extra dice of weapon damage. Incredibly good. The race of half-orc doesn't really have any sub-races, so that is the sub-race is half-orc. Incredible. We'll see where this fits in on the tier list, but this is obviously a martial-based class. Barbarians, fighters, paladins, you're going to be using this for martial classes 100% of the time. I don't really think it makes much sense for a wizard because you're missing out on things like Savage Attack. So, yeah, for mages, doesn't really make sense to use this class, but for martial classes, this is... for martial classes, this race is just incredibly, incredibly strong and probably OP. Here we are, guys. This is the main part of the video, the meat and potatoes, what you've been waiting for. So we went through every race. We went through every sub-race in terms of what they bring to the table. Now, how are they going to compare to each other? Now, I want to say, when I actually put these races into the actual tier list, if you have any questions about why I'm putting it there, ask me down in the comments and I will explain it to you and give you my thoughts on what is actually going on with each of these judgments. Also, go back to the relevant timestamp to the race description in the first part of the video to actually get my breakdown of it and what classes I think it pairs well with. So let's start off with human. Human is a really average race. It's not bad at all. It actually is really good with civil militia. And so, honestly, human deserves to be an A tier. It's not exceptional in any way, but the thing about human is you can use it for mages, you can use it for martial classes, and it does bring a lot to the table. Honestly, I do like playing as human. They also do have good facial animations. It's a very popular race. Not my favorite by any measure, but something I do play around with a lot. And yeah, human is overall pretty good. Nothing exceptional, nothing bad. GITHYANKI, amazing for martial classes, pretty bad for mages. This is definitely a martial-oriented race. I will be putting it in S. I will tell you this, it is in low S, and mainly why you're playing the GITHYANKI is all the gear that is specific to GITHYANKI as a race. There's a lot of gear in the game that's specific for GITHYANKI. GITHYANKI is amazing if you're playing as, let's say, a barbarian, if you're playing as a fighter. It is a really, really good race. I would say it is kind of class dependent. Again, like I said, barbarian fighter, I think, are the two classes specifically that pair well with this race. But GITHYANKI, really good. And I do think it's S just because of the gear. Elf. Elf is probably in B. And the reason I would say Elf is in B, it actually ties into Half-Elf, which Half-Elf will be above human. So let's put these all in relation to each other. So Half-Elf is just a combination of human and elf. So if you're playing either of these two races, you could say on paper, maybe not for roleplay reasons, but on paper, you should be playing a half-elf. I do think half-elf kind of beats out these two. In terms of just the base races, I would say human's a little bit better because I like having more weapons and armor specializations, specifically with civil militia, compared to what you get with the elf. You do get the dark vision, which is nice, but if you're going for dark vision, you're going to probably be picking something like, let's say, dwarf, like the Dwagar, or you're going to be picking the Drow. Yeah, so you're probably not picking elf for the specific. You're not picking the elf just specifically for that. So one thing I will say about this, I don't really see any reason to ever play an elf in the game because there's a drow. And that's what we're going to be talking about next. So elf is kind of a meh race. It looks really good. The facial animations are good, but it is kind of hard to recommend. Next up, we are going to the Drow. Now, the Drow will be absolutely 100% in the S tier. Probably one of the two best races in the game. So I'll be telling you what the other best race is in a minute. But Drow is absolutely one of those two. If you're playing any spellcasting class, I think the Drow is simply the best choice. It is incredible. You get, superior dark vision. You get Fey Ancestry. You get fast movement speed. It's really, really, really good. But yeah, even though like Elf does have several different races, and like the Wood Elf does get a little bit more movement speed, the Drow has enough movement speed. You have the superior dark vision. There's a lot going on there. Click on to the Drow timestamp if you want to go back and see why I think the Drow kind of is OP and unbalanced. It just has more. That's as simple as that. It's just basically Elf Plus. It also helps you a lot in Act 1 of the game to basically trivialize encounters, get in without any... You're a Drow and you just walk in the door. So it's really, really good. I love Drow, especially because of its matriarchal structure. You probably should play a female Drow. That's probably, especially roleplay-wise, I think a female Drow is probably a little bit better than a male Drow. But yeah, Drow, incredibly good looking, incredible ways. Now, here's something a lot of people don't play enough of, and that is the Half-Orc. They'll be going right above the GITHYANKI and right below the Drow, and these two races are the best in the game, bar none. Half-Orc specifically is the best race for any martial class that is in melee range. So I would say Rangers and Rogues, probably better to play a Halfling or a Gnome. But in terms of actually Barbarians, Fighters, if you're not playing a GITHYANKI, you're playing a Half-Orc. Barbarians especially, I think Half-Orc makes the most sense. And it's just an incredible race, and I really, really like it. It has so much on paper with savage attacks. It has the ability to where instead of being downed, Relentless Endurance, you basically only are put down to 1 HP, which is an incredible, incredible ability. Half-Orc is not played enough, guys. In your next playthrough, pick a Half-Orc. It is just an incredible race, along with Drow. Pretty much borderline OP, has way too much going on for it, and it's just really, really good. Halfling is really nice. I will probably put it in above Elf and B. I don't think it's incredible, but I do think it's quite good. Halfling and Gnome both suffer from the issue of limited movement speed, and they share this with Dwarf. So all of these races that have limited movement speed, I'm going to be putting a little bit lower than some of the other races. And the reason why is I hate ritual spells. I'm a big, not a proponent, a hater of ritual spells. And for these classes, it feels like you're mandated to put Long Strider on every single long rest. Which, if you're doing a lot of playthroughs in the game, guys, it can get very, very annoying. Now, I know there's people that don't mind this, and for them, gnomes and halflings and dwarves are going to be better. But I kind of make an exception for the dwarves, specifically the Dwagar, but Halfling, not my favorite race, but it does have some really good things going on for it. If you want to know what it's good for, go back to its relevant timestamp in the video description. And yeah, it does have some good things going on for it, but a little bit below, but still better than Elf, right there in the B tier. Gnome, same basic situation going on here. And yeah, it's right there along with Halfling. I would say it's kind of coin flip about which of these two races is better or worse. I kind of favor Halflings a little bit, but Gnome, it's good. I did one playthrough where I played all Gnomes, and we did fantastic. Being able to have resistances in a lot of these races, right? You have like Lucky, you have the ability to prevent being charmed and things of that nature, advantages on certain saving throws. It's good, guys, but the problem is, again, I was just talking about it before in the halfling segment. You basically are mandated to put long strider on. You are bound to ritual spells. It gets very annoying as the game goes on. Also, some of the animations, I will tell you this, if you're just in it for the roleplay, a lot of the animations, like the romance animations, things get weird when you have the short races, along with, the average size races, I guess you could say. So that is something that you should be aware of, is sometimes the animation quality is not quite there or looks kind of weird. But yeah, I like gnomes and halflings. They're just the middling classes. I don't think they're incredibly good. If you really like the lucky trait specifically, get a divination wizard. That's the way I look at it. You can use a class that basically does the same thing, but is better in my opinion. Dwarf, I'm going to put Dwarf in A, and it shares the same problems as the Halflings and the Gnome. The thing about the Dwarf is the resiliencies are better, like specifically against poison. I think that's quite useful. And the Dwagor subrace, if you didn't look, you should click onto the Dwarf segment of the video. The Dwagor is the best subrace of Dwarf, and this is specifically why I'm putting Dwarf as high as I am. Pretty much anytime I play Dwarf, I pick Dragor, which is kind of like a Dwarf / Drow. And so that pulls it up a lot, specifically. But I do like Dwarves. I also think, honestly, it's kind of weird, but I honestly think some of the facial animations and some of the characters, when you just do randomized appearance, look the best on Dwarfs, especially female Dwarfs, but male Dwarfs as well. A lot of the beard and hair options really work for Dwarfs. And yeah, they're really good. So I'm a big fan of Dwarf, and it is better, in my opinion, than the other two shorter races. So now we go into Tiefling. This is going to be the first one in the C category. Now, personally, I love the look of Tieflings. Like Karlach is one of my favorite companions. I'm going to be doing that and talk about all the companions. Tieflings is an incredible, incredible race visually, and in terms of facial animations, and most of the characters in the game, like Zevlor, like Karlach, there's so many Tieflings that are incredibly cool. Roland, but the problem is, just on paper, in terms of why you would want to play this class, you wouldn't. It just sucks, guys. It doesn't get enough. Its resistance to fire damage is so bad. Like, it's so minor in how that helps you. And you can get, like, amulets. You can get a bunch of things to give you fire resistance. So it's 100% not worth it. And when you compare it to some races like the Half-Orc or the Drow, you're just like, please, guys, Lorien, please buff Tiefling. Tiefling needs a lot more going for it for people to pick it more. And then we get the sad, the lonely, the Dragonborn. Guys, I want to say, just pick a Dragonborn, play it out, because not enough people play it. I think it looks incredible. I think it's one of the best races in terms of its visual design. It looks so cool when you're playing as a Dirge and you're a Dragonborn. Is it good? No, it's not. It is absolutely gutter tier terrible. Like I was just talking about Tiefling, the resistances just don't do anything, and the breath attacks are a joke, guys. The breath attacks do such low damage that you're just like, why did I even use this attack? Even at the beginning of the game in Act 1, you probably will never use your breath attack because it's so minor, the damage it does. And definitely in the later part of the game, it would be an absolute meme to use your breath attack. So, unfortunately, Dragonborn just got nothing going on for them, even though they look really cool. Visually designed, I believe Larian needs to buff the Tiefling and the Dragonborn and just give us more things and more incentives to play these races, because I absolutely love the look of these two races. But if you want to know what the best races in the game are, it's right here. Drow, Half-Orc, Githyanki. Drow if you're basically playing any mage character. Half-Orc if you're playing basically any martial character. And Githyanki is specifically Barbarian Fighter. If you're playing Rogue or Ranger, I would say probably the Halfling or the Gnome. And you can look specifically into the subclasses because some of them get advantages in stealth. But I would say these two are probably the best if you're playing a Rogue or Ranger. So I hope this race overview really helped you. I hope it really gave you value. Please let me know down in the comments below what you think the best races are in the game. and I want to know your ideas for my next video. I want to include this. I'm building an inclusive community here. And yeah, please subscribe. Please hit that like button. And please hit that notification bell. So few people, only about 1% of my viewers are subscribed. It really helps me out. It helps me to keep doing this for you guys. I really hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next video.